For several years, the ideology of climate change has been widely peddled to advocate the safety of the planet Earth. Several professed global organizations have consistently publicized the impending doom of climate conditions in our world. It has, however, become evident that the climate change agents have become deliberate creators of its so-called effects, highlighting the age-long diplomatic plan to gain political and socio-economic control of the world by strategic coercion. In order to gain this sinister control, the advocates have insistently associated various human consumables, emissions and inventions as harmful contributors to climate change and weather conditions, but with much scrutiny and sufficient evidence, it became apparent that they have developed several deceptive tentacles of climate change.
Climate change is a hoax.
The people who are pushing this kind of Green Deal and the climate change nonsense, they may have a superficial concern about the environment or about the climate, but that's not what really this is all about. It's really all about power and control.
The number one goal of the control oligarchs is to transfer power away from people, away from countries, and more towards international institutions controlled by them. So this is people like Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Mark Zuckerberg. Those are the guys on the cover, but there's really, there's a lot more of them, unfortunately, who are working on this agenda to transfer power from nations to international institutions where they're unelected, they're unaccountable, controlled by the control oligarchs.
So this hoax of climate change is just what I just said. It's a hoax. That's all. It's a deception.
One of the deceptive tentacles of climate change is the war on fossil fuel. While many have conscientiously been programmed to live with the academic knowledge of fossil fuel, the perpetrators of the war against fossil fuel as it relates to climate change have a completely different orientation.
Fossil means obtained by digging. Obtained by digging. And so they have a scientific definition for the guy for the classroom, for the chemistry guy in the classroom who's always been fooled. So they go, fear. And you're thinking about hydrogen and carbon. They're not thinking hydrogen and carbon. They're thinking anything that helps you to be you. That's how come water is included in it. You know, I was having a discussion some time ago with certain people, and I said, look, they're coming for your water. So you better thank God that you have rain that they can't stop. I said, for water? I said, yes. It's part of their thinking when they talk fossil fuel.
Up to 6% of the world's emissions come from water treatment, and the need for desalination is expected to double.
Water has it tough, because with more climate change, fresh water's going away, so you need to build more desal and industrial reuse. There is no choice.
Let me be very clear again. The phase-out of fossil fuels is essential and inevitable. No amount of spin or scare tactics will change that. Let's hope it doesn't come too late.
So when they talk fossil fuel, don't think of petroleum. It's not only that. It's not only that. It includes your water.
They only look for negatives about fossil fuels, and they don't look for positives. So they ignore the fact that fossil fuels, insofar as they warm the earth, will obviously save more lives than lives taken away. And the biggest thing is they ignore the energy we get from fossil fuels, which we can't get as cost effectively from anything else, which helps us protect ourselves from every form of climate disaster and danger. That's why the death rate has gone down, because we've used fossil fuel energy to take the naturally dangerous climate and make it unnaturally safe. So Hillary needs to understand fossil fuels are a great thing for the climate, and decarbonization will make the climate deadly, and it'll make everything deadly.
They tell us they're trying to save the planet, and it's all about fossil fuel? What do they mean? here again another subterfuge. Because they say fossil fuel, and everyone rushes to think fossil fuel. So you think fossil, and you're thinking dead plants, dead animals, long ago. You're thinking, but that's not their thinking. Subterfuge. That's not their thinking.
At this Geneva Convention, Rockefeller took advantage of sending some scientists over who said oil, petroleum, is hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Therefore, it must be derived from the spoiling, the rotting of formerly living matter. And playing the game properly, when this scientific convention was over, they defined oil as the residue from formerly living matter. Well, that makes it a fossil fuel. I don't know why they decided to use the word fossil, but it says formerly living matter is fossil. Well, of course, today, and another thing we should know is that there has never been a fossil, a real fossil found below 16,000 feet. And you can't argue at 16,000 as a level line, because someplace the ground sinks and so on. But 16 is what the scientists say, 16,000. We mine oil, or we drill for oil at 30,000, 33,000, 28,000 every day of the week. So right there, we rule it out that it isn't fossil fuel. It's called fossil fuel for the minds of the public to feel that it is an asset that is running out, being depleted. We talk about depletion allowance, which is a lot of, and actually, if you know the world's oil supply, you know that it is not going to run out for an awfully long time.
Another very distinctive deceptive tentacle of climate change is the sporadic crusade to drastically reduce carbon dioxide emissions. The perpetuators of the climate change hoax have gone as far as placing exorbitant taxes on entities that have large carbon-emitting machinery. Yet, the labeling of carbon dioxide as the major contributor to climate change remains largely unproven.
So the hoax is about carbon emission. Oh, there's so much carbon emission. Yes, but you don't have a monopoly on science to be able to tell us that there will be no balance. And I'm warning, this is not about carbon emission. It's about trying to have a monopoly on science for another super control.
So we are told carbon emissions are responsible for climate change. So CO2 is the culprit here. So let's destroy this narrative with their own numbers. In the example of Canada, we are paying a carbon tax because Justin Trudeau deems it necessary for the people to pay for their own emissions, their contributions to this climate change. We are emitting a lot of CO2, so we are causing these climate problems. I don't see any problems, but okay, let's go with that. There are 318 billion trees in Canada. One mature tree clears or absorbs 48 pounds of CO2 per year. This means 7.6 billion tons of CO2 are absorbed by trees every year. Now, it is estimated that 545 million tons of CO2 is produced in Canada every year, which means the trees in Canada, and I'm not talking about all the other vegetation other than trees. I'm not talking about that. We're not including that. Which means trees only in Canada absorb 14 times more than the carbon emission of Canada, and we are made to pay a carbon tax. So tell me again what it is about. Is it about climate change? It's not. If there's no CO2, we're doomed. There cannot be life without CO2. Now let's talk about the U.S. There are 228 billion trees in the United States, with the capacity to clean 5.47 billion tons of CO2 every year. And the U.S. produces 5 billion tons of CO2, which means the trees only absorb more than carbon emissions in the United States. So what are we talking about? Now let's move a little further. There's an estimate of 3 trillion trees around the world. The worldwide CO2 emission is at 37 billion tons. But the trees around the world absorb 72 billion, almost 73 billion tons of CO2, which means the trees around the world have the capacity to absorb twice as much carbon emission. Wake up. There's no CO2 problem. There's no carbon emission problem. There's no climate change. Wake up, people.
CO2 is a gas of life. When you have more CO2, the plant kingdom, the whole ecology, even the oceans, gonna have more, basically, ability, more fishes, more everything.
More life.
More life, essentially. That's why it's called gas of life. And these people want to demonize it as some gas that can cause global warming, can cause hurricane to run faster or weaker. I don't know what they want. To have more rain, more droughts, and all this other nonsense that they claim. All of that, it just ain't so.
So they keep blaming human beings for being the problem. They say that we're emitting so much carbon dioxide. Can they tell us how much carbon dioxide is already in the atmosphere and how much is required to be there? And how they measured it? The deception.
Carbon dioxide is the lifeblood of vegetation on this planet. No one has been able to prove to me that human-produced carbon dioxide affects the temperature more than natural variation does, because they can't.
With the war against carbon emission losing its foothold, the climate alarmists then began to propagate the invention of electronic cars as the solution to the supposed climate-damaging petroleum-powered cars. Ordinarily, electronic cars should be a laudable achievement, but it is yet another deceptive tentacle of the climate change hoax.
In the same way that we have taxed cigarettes, we're going to have to tax carbon.
We have to take combustion engine vehicles off the road as rapidly as we can.
My president says the future
is electric, and there's no turning back.
To make sure of that, some states are banning gas-powered cars.
Gasoline cars are driving us toward climate chaos. We actually have to stop using fossil fuel vehicles.
California's governor made that an executive order.
We will eliminate the sales of internal combustion engines.
Governments everywhere say they plan to do that.
The government has a vision for a future where all our cars will be electric.
But this is just magical thinking. It can't happen.
It won't change the future in any significant way with respect to oil use or carbon dioxide emissions.
If all of us bought electric cars, would it make any difference?
So the world has 15, 18 million electric vehicles now. It could go to 300 million, maybe 500 million vehicles. I don't think it'll get that many, but that's the aspiration. That would reduce world oil consumption by about 10%.
And even if all vehicles somehow switch to electricity, there'd be another problem, because despite what we've heard,
further, faster, cheaper, and greener.
Electric cars are not all that green. Most of America's electricity comes from fossil fuels, natural gas and coal. Just 12% comes from wind and solar.
You have to mine somewhere on Earth 500,000 pounds of minerals and rock to make one battery.
And most of this mining isn't done in the U.S. American regulations make it nearly impossible. So it's done other places, polluting those countries. And worse, ingredients in batteries are mined in places that enslave people and use child labor.
An army of children are at the heart of the mining production, wearing no shoes and in the most wretched conditions.
Most Americans proudly driving electric cars don't know about this.
Volkswagen published an honest study. They point out that the first 60,000 miles or so you're driving an electric vehicle, that electric vehicle will have emitted more carbon dioxide than if you just drove a conventional vehicle in the first place.
This then establishes that the proponents of climate change have in recent past subverted worthy inventions as a means to push their narrative. Another area, which they have extended their deceptive tentacles to, is the area of geoengineering.
When you talk about geoengineering, which is the deliberate large-scale technological, they say intervention, which is a diplomatic word for manipulation. So I would say it's the technological manipulation of an environmental process in the Earth's climate system.
The array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations.
There is also the hilarious and yet despicable clamor for reduction in the consumption of meats and some other types of foods, citing them as food not dangerous to the human body but dangerous to the health of the planet, precisely what they call the greenhouse gas emission.
Our food systems are harming the health of people and planet. Food systems contribute to over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and account for almost 1/3 of the global burden of disease. Transforming food systems is therefore essential by shifting towards healthier, diversified, and more plant-based diets. If food systems delivered healthy diets for all, we could save 8 million lives per year. WHO is committed to supporting countries to develop and implement policies to improve diets and fight climate change.
My question is, they say that the effort is for tackling climate change. But it doesn't look like it's for tackling climate change because they've never been able to prove their claims. They just insist that everybody should be afraid of a future that's coming. What they're talking about climate change right now is not climate change at all. This one is a hoax. So we can't allow this happen under our watch. We can't let it happen. They want it to happen, but they can't drag us into their world. We're going to drag them into our world. We're going to drag them into our world so that this doesn't escalate the way they want it to escalate. So we will effect changes by the power of the Holy Ghost because we can. We can and we will.
For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back will continue to do so till he is taken out of the way. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 7.